sexy on Secular Sexuality.
Hello and welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show with the freshest vocabulary. I'm Christy Powell. My co-host tonight is the they, them, they all warned you about. Welcome, Rudy Bee.
Hail and well met to you all.
And our guest tonight has written about purity culture and feminism and brings to us tonight a bit about the non-binary. Welcome, Mixed Dianna Anderson.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
We are happy to have you. So obviously we've got two Enbys on the show, and the theme of the show today is we're talking about non-binary genders. So all of our Enby friends in the live chat, please call in, or even if you're cis or maybe just cis-ish, perhaps you're questioning. I don't know what your deal is, but if you want to talk to us, call the show at 512-991-9242 or tiny.cc/callsex, because the show is starting right now.
All right, let's jump right into it. Dianna, just some very quick table setting. I recognize that gender is a social construct, but we're increasingly understanding that all gender, including trans and NB identities, are steeped in biology. So is it fair then to say that non-cis and non-binary identities have always been part of human society?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm working on a book right now about the history of non-binary gender and stuff. It'll be out next year, so pre-order will be hopefully around this time in a year. But one of the things I found when I was doing that research was that there is a long history of gender nonconforming and trans people going back to the Egyptian Empire and the Roman Empire. There was a long-held tale of an Egyptian man who cut off his own penis and then said to his wife, "Hey, I'm like you now," and stuff. And it's not sure if that's a trans story, but it seems to be read as that. And then over in Japan, we have people who have been depicted in their history as both male and female. The founder of Kabuki was assigned female at birth, but cross-dressed a lot to the point where statues that depict them often depict them as a male samurai, which is really fascinating. And probably my favorite story is the story of Elagabalus, a young emperor of Rome who offered the kingdom's fortunes basically to anybody who could turn them into a woman, which is really fascinating. And so we know going back centuries that we've been here forever. Yeah. There have been people, even before we had the technology to have those surgeries and stuff, we've been around.
Yeah, no question. And I know that our culture is struggling, honestly, in a lot of ways to broaden our model a little bit. And we are still kind of stuck in this false dichotomy of male and female. So what are some of the ways that past cultures have worked to conceptualize or understand these ideas?
You find a lot of different, we call them third genders, but they're basically just a different form of gender in a lot of Native American cultures. They're captured as a whole by the name Two-Spirit, which means different things depending on which tribe, depending on which area of the country that you're in. And in other cultures, other countries, we find all sorts of flexibility around gender roles and ideas of who is male, who is female. One thing that I emphasize in my book, and I take a very westernized approach to gender because that's the culture I'm steeped in,
Sure.
But what we view as these set normative roles are not so. And so I lived in Japan for a year about 10 years ago, and the ways in which male and female were considered divided from each other were very different from Western ideas of it. Like my male students carried pink backpacks and stuff, which was a surprise to my westernized view and stuff. So I found that gender tends to be very flexible depending on your culture.
I'm always fascinated by that. You know, I've read stories. I'm certainly not an expert here, but looking back to recognize that what we think of as like baby blue, baby boy
Mhm.
blue, and baby pink, those were basically flipped prior to World War II, as I
Yeah.
understand it. And these things that are supposed to be like hard set in our biology are anything but. And I just find that absolutely fascinating. Do you have any other examples or models for us of two or three or more gendered societies from the past?
Not off the top of my head, but
Sure.
I do want to mention one of my favorite non-binary people who shows up in Western culture in colonial America. In the Quaker tradition, there was this person who imagined themselves a prophet of God, who called themselves the public universal friend and refused to be referred to by any pronouns. They were the friend. They were not she, her, they wasn't really a singular quite yet. So if they had been there, they might have done that. But they insisted that they encapsulated both male and female. And this was somebody who existed in colonial times, and like the way that culture reacted to them was basically reacting to them as a prophet, not necessarily as a
Sure.
non-gender thing. Like gender
Yeah.
wasn't a part of it for the controversy that they caused. And I just sort of
Yeah, I
loved
can
how that.
imagine that the claiming to be like the voice of God was slightly more
Yeah,
important
a
to
little
those
bit,
people.
Yeah, and
It is
yet
this interesting
today
thing.
that's a more common claim, and a claim that I think that is maybe more accepted by at least certain subsects of
Mhm.
society, which is just baffling to me. But it does raise an interesting question here, because I feel like whenever we do one of these conversations and we talk about like these moments from history, we kind of pull out these like individual case studies, and it can be really easy to dismiss those and just be
Mhm.
like, well, yeah, every society has a bunch of crazies. What does that actually mean? And it's frustrating and it's heartbreaking to realize that in our modern Western society, so much of the history that has come down to us has been thoroughly edited and
Mhm.
heavily revised to specifically exclude these things. So often what we have is just kind of little scraps and bits and pieces. Can you illuminate that for us at all? I mean, are we reaching here when we talk about these stories?
No, not at all. The transgender and non-binary history is one, unfortunately, of violence and erasure.
Mm,
One of the most important events that happened within our history was the 1933 sacking of the Institute for Sexuality in Berlin, where there was literally decades of research on homosexuality, transgender identity. Although it wasn't called that, it was called cross-dressing and transvestitism. And stuff. But in 1933, the Nazis came to power, and one of the things that they did, like almost immediately, was to go in and destroy that body of knowledge. They killed a couple of trans people who were at the institute, and they burned all the books that were there, all the research that had been done, every study that had been put together. So all the body of knowledge that we had at that time was just lost.
mhm.
And they had started performing surgeries at that point. So all the surgical knowledge that we had, some of it was preserved through survivors, but a lot of it was lost. So we had to essentially, after World War II, start back again from zero.
Actual Nazis keeping us
Yeah.
from understanding our gender.
Yep.
Tell me if you've heard this one before. It's yeah, it's absolutely heartbreaking. How have non-binary identities been considered in our own society at various times in history?
It's hard because we didn't have the words for it for so
Hmm.
long. And cultural memory tends to only go back about 60 years. So like we barely remember Christine Jorgensen, who was the first American trans woman to go get surgery. And for so long, with the way trans identity was medicalized, what it meant was that you had to meet certain criteria to ever get surgery. So people who were non-binary, who existed as that, aren't necessarily recorded as that in history, largely because history is kept by cis people.
Sure.
And the medical programs required you to have a binary identity, because they use the language of I am a man trapped in a woman's body, or I'm a woman trapped in a man's body, sort of binarism that meant that non-binary people who didn't feel necessarily that they were binary either had to transition all the way into that opposite gender, or they had to find some other way to DIY it. And we don't have a lot of those records. One of the most famous probably is the writer Leslie Feinberg, who wrote a fictionalized narrative of their own life, of her own life, in Stone Butch Blues, where they talk about, there's a character named Jess who sort of halfway transitions and then quote unquote desists, but is happy in their non-binary space.
Well, I feel like the objections that are already, streaming in from a small percentage of the audience, and the thing that I got so tired of hearing that I eventually just wrote a blog post about it so that I could write that URL on my business card rather than actually having a conversation with people, because I got sick of going to cocktail parties, and when people found out I was a sex therapist, the first thing they wanted to do was talk to me about, trans folks in bathrooms and trans folks in sports. And so I put some research together pointing out the fact that the science of sex is not just XX and XY. And we've tried so hard to discuss that on this show and to get that idea out there. But people are really desperate, I think, to hold on to these really biblically grounded oversimplifications. So I'm really interested then in how Christianity specifically has impacted our views on gender historically.
Yeah, the thing about the way Christianity works in our American culture is that it's evangelicalism that has really taken hold and sort of made that no true Scotsman, where like you aren't really a Christian unless you hold these very specific evangelical beliefs. And I come from a background of theology. I was raised Baptist, studied at a small Baptist college, and then went to grad school at Baylor in Texas. And one thing that I've learned is that a lot of evangelicalism, a lot of our current Christianity is reaction to the civil rights movement. It's a reaction to Black people getting more rights in the mainstream. The first sex ed classes that happened were to prevent race mixing. That was part of the thing that they wanted to stop.
Fantastic. What a legacy for me to jump into as a sex educator. Glad we're all here.
Christy, you have to work specifically to get mixed couples together now. You know that you have to undo that. No,
I'm right on it. I'm in a monogamous relationship, Rudy. I'm not looking to mix any. Oh, that's not what you meant. Never mind. I'm sorry, Diana. Please continue.
But one of the things is it's this imposition of whiteness onto society. Basically, it's all part and parcel of white supremacy, where evangelicals saw what was happening in the civil rights movement and the feminist and womanist movements at that same time in the 60s and went, okay, we need a moral pushback against this. And so we're going to lean hard into gender roles and waiting until marriage, because that wasn't really a thing all that much until that time, until good old Jerry Falwell hopped in there.
Jerry Falwell. So glad we're having these conversations.
Oh, wait, what am I missing about this Jerry person? What am I missing?
He founded Liberty University in Virginia. He was the guy who started the moral majority movement in the 80s.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I'll send you the link to the episode that we did on the history of purity culture with Dr. Darrell Ray. I'll make sure to put that in the footnotes for everybody else, but we'll get Rudy caught back up to speed. It's worth pointing out that Liberty is a university, I'm using that term very, very loosely, that still, to my knowledge, is advertising on Fox News and on different conservative radio stations, and is promoted by Sean Hannity and Rush Limbaugh and the like. Still very much a powerful force in this in these conversations today.
Well, I mean, it's not being advertised by Rush Limbaugh anymore, at least.
Fair to say, my reference was out of date. I apologize on that one.
It's being advertised on whoever is replacing Limbaugh.
Right. Right. Oh goodness.
Oh,
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, so like the modern evangelicalism of these anti-trans, anti-gay culture war movements is really a product of our parents' generation and reacting to the civil rights movement and stuff. Like, transness wasn't really acceptable necessarily in society, but I went through the newspaper archives of the Star Tribune, which is our big local paper here in Minnesota, because the University of Minnesota was one of the first places to do gender confirmation surgeries for trans people way back in the 60s. And the way they're written about pre-moral majority and then post-moral majority is so different, because the first one is just this sort of, we're just reporting what this is. We are calmly explaining what transsexualism is and what the surgery entails. And then afterwards, it was some people believe this is a controversial thing to do, and sort of trying to balance it. So it's really fascinating to see how that sneaks into the rhetoric as well.
I remember reading the newspaper article about Christy. What was her name? You said it earlier. I forgot.
Christine Jorgensen.
Yes, Christine Jorgensen. I remember reading that and being like, oh, this isn't negative at all. Like, this is like World War II era or something. And it's not negative. It's just like, wow, this is a medical marvel. The he is now a she. Look at this. Medicine's come so far. Science is doing so much. It wasn't anything moralistic or anything like that. It was just like, look at how gorgeous this woman is now. Holy shit. And I remember being like, what the fuck changed? There's no way I would even read an article like that today.
Yeah. That's fair to say, and it really is worth highlighting just how much of these conversations are happening because of such intentional misinformation. We're at a bizarre moment in our own cultural history and politics as we are trying to grapple with mass media and what Facebook's responsibility and the election tampering, and we're trying to work through all of this as misinformation has really taken a technological leap. But it's important to remember that, particularly when we're talking about our gender and our sexuality, that these conversations have been heavily leaned on, and there's been somebody with their thumb on the scale for so much of our recent, historically speaking, our recent history, that everything that we're talking about here has to be kind of skewed by this sort of like black hole that we've been swirling around.
Yeah, the current media narrative has memory hold a whole ton of information about trans people. And you can see it particularly, like, one of the ways that I saw it was in the 1990s when Boys Don't Cry came out, the Hilary Swank movie about Brendan Teena, who was a trans man who was brutally murdered in Humboldt, Nebraska. And when that movie came out, newspapers were saying, like, this is the first moment we've had to talk about trans people and stuff. And a bunch of trans people at that time were going, what? No, like, we've been around here forever. Like, just because you're discovering it as a cis person doesn't make it new.
Yeah, fair to say. Well, I really want to have more conversations about the. But before we do, I wanted to give Rudy a chance to jump on the phones for us.
I'm so excited to take this call. I'm so excited to take this call, you guys. This is Tanjil, who currently uses she, her pronouns. She's one of our wonderful mods. And she says, I recently discovered I might be slightly Enby. Hi, Tanji. How are you?
Ooh.
Hi, everybody. How are you?
Good. I'm so excited.
Yeah, excited to hear from you.
You don't even understand. I'm so happy to hear from you.
Well, this is a really interesting thing that this came up so recently. Over the years, I've actually been trying to explore a lot about trans and how people feel and gender, and trying to imagine myself as having a really strong gender identity. And this has been going on for quite some time, and I really like to put myself in other people's shoes and try and really imagine what things might be like. And I have struggled. I have really struggled. And I recently had a lot of discussions about what it means to be a woman. Like, what is the meaning? How do you know that you're a woman? Anyway, after months and months of discussions about all sorts of different things and trying to imagine myself as something, I've come to the conclusion that I actually don't identify very strongly at all with my gender. If I were to wake up tomorrow as a man, I don't think it would bother me in the least. And I could even bring up examples during my childhood where I fantasized about being a stockman. I was very happy.
All right. Well, I had about a dozen more questions. We'll see if we can't work on getting Tanjil back on the line.
Yeah. Tanjil, come back. Oh, no.
I'm so excited to hear her story.
Yeah, me too. Are you back?
Hello, I'm
Oh, there you
Hey.
Yay!
Okay. Your audio just dropped out for a little bit. Yep.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so even through my childhood, and which was also confused because I'm asexual and didn't know. So all through my childhood, I had fantasies about being a stockman. You would call it a cowboy, I guess. And I really did imagine myself as a man. I didn't imagine myself doing it as a female. You know what I mean? I was a late developer, and when I got breasts and got my period, I was so upset. I was really disappointed. So I guess I can empathise with Enby more than I ever really expected. It's really just never gelled in my head that I can indeed relate to the whole Enby thing. Sometimes I'm really thick. Things take a long time to get through my head. So that was one of the things I wanted to talk about. Just I don't understand a feeling of strong sense of gender.
Yeah, well, we can relate.
Yeah, that actually is one of the things that made me realize that I'm non-binary, was that I felt a disconnect from womanhood, from being a woman. And I was like, maybe I'm not a woman. Maybe I'm this other thing and stuff. And once I allowed myself to think through that, I realized that that was true for me and probably had been true for a very long time.
Well,
Yeah.
I'd love to hear y'all's commentary on this, but part of maybe for the audience, like maybe the discrepancy or the distinction, at least in my mind, between gender fluidity and being non-binary is that maybe I don't want to use the word apathy. Forgive me if that's on the wrong course, but I think of myself as being at least somewhat gender fluid because I do very deeply connect with some of these forms of gender expression, but not necessarily in a consistent way, and not necessarily in a polar way. And is that anything that would help somebody who's maybe struggling with figuring out their own adjectives and sort of working through these things might be able to glob onto the difference between being excited about expressing themselves as both genders or one gender than the other versus having maybe a disconnection or a disinterest in the whole conversation?
Yeah.
I think I'm more on the disinterested side myself. I just really don't care.
I mean, the people that I know that are like that, I had this friend that I met when I was working at a restaurant, and the first day that they worked there, both me and my partner worked at the same restaurant, and we both separately, without having talked to each other, took this person aside and asked them their pronouns, because we both got the vibe really quickly of like, this person is non-binary for sure. We just took that person's head, like, hey, by the way, what are your pronouns? Just like between you and me. I don't want to out you from everybody, but like, you're not cis, right? Like, and they were like, I don't really know what my pronouns are. I was like, cool, I'll use they, them, because, but I'll use she, her in front of other people, so I'm not outing you. And they were like, okay, cool. And we'd been friends for a long time after that. We're still friends, even though they've moved out of state now. But at some point, I was like, so what is your like gender identity? Like, I know you're not cis, but we've never really like put a word on it. And they were just like, I don't know, agender maybe, because I don't really care. Like, I know that I don't relate to being a woman or a man, but I don't know if I relate to any gender. So that's the only experience I have with people who are gender apathetic. Maybe agender is a label that might work for you. I don't know. But that's just the experience that I've had.
Yeah, it might, because I'm just completely apathetic to the whole thing. It just doesn't bother me either way. But I must admit, I've had more than one partner accuse me of being more like a guy. I'm not, especially when it comes to remembering anniversary dates and stuff like that. Yeah, the romance thing, not good at it.
Cool. I don't know if that's even. Yeah, no, go ahead, Dianna.
I was gonna say, and that's totally a thing that's not tied down to gender. One of my I have best friends who are a lesbian couple, and they forget anniversaries and stuff like that all the time. So, like, that's just a thing people do, I think.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. Somebody in the chat said that they actually identify as gender apathetic, so not necessarily genderless, but just like, I don't have a strong connection to a gender, and that's my gender is not. My gender is like, eh. Yeah.
In interviewing people for my book and stuff, I found quite a few people who felt that way. Other people had very specific ideas of what their gender is. Like, I am a trans masc person who expresses with femininity and stuff like that. But then there were others who were just like, I asked them, describe your gender identity, and they just went, no.
Yeah.
It doesn't. No.
Well, what's the distinction there between, just not having done the work, not being an introspective person, not having spent time looking into these things, versus being, one label or another? Or is that an answerable question at all? I mean, these are really squishy concepts, I think.
Yeah, and non-binary is still so new in our vocabulary. Like, the first instances of it are in 2013, and stuff being used to describe gender. So it's a thing that we're still forming and we're still deciding on. So to me right now, non-binary includes the nots as well as the ones who have a very specific idea. So
fair to say.
Yeah. See, I've actually done quite a bit of introspection on it. It's just that I don't have any strong feelings. I can't find any fucks to give.
Fair to say.
You've
Fair
been
to
searching
say.
for fucks, and there are none. No
there are
fucks.
none. My field is empty of fucks. I just don't care.
Well, I can tell you, as a person who identifies as genderqueer, I give a lot of fucks about my gender. It's just that, like, I use really random adjectives for my gender. It's like kawaii. That's my gender. Like, cute. Cute. That's me. I'm cute. I don't know if it's masculine or feminine. Sometimes it's more or less in the masc or fem side, but it's always cute.
Yeah. But I must say, I think a lot about trans people, and it it just kills me to think that you could feel so strongly and be in the wrong body. My heart just breaks for them. I wish I could empathise a little more. I don't need to physically empathise, but I can mentally empathise. But
Sure.
it's a hard thing, isn't it?
Well, I'll say it's not always sad. And that's something that I have been trying to sort of encourage in my own sort of activism is like, let's not equate transness with a tragic existence. Let's granted,
point.
for a lot of people, it is a lot of dysphoria and a lot of shit to work through, but not for everybody. That is not, I don't want to equate tragedy and sadness and struggle with the trans experience.
Suffering isn't a
Well, I think
requirement to be a member of the community.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly.
I think it's more what I mean is the external difficulties with other people and the responses, because a lot of us are born into bodies we don't particularly like. We wouldn't have chosen had we had. I would have been at least 3 inches taller.
Yeah. I would have been like 3 inches shorter. It's like, damn, I'm already short. Let me be like pocket sized at least. I'm going to be short.
Well, I don't know if we've got time, but if we do, I actually wouldn't mind talking about one other thing that I posted to the Facebook group. I don't know if you saw it, about an age disparity.
No, tell us the conversation. What's on your mind?
Okay. I joined...
Tanjil, well, I'm sorry. I guess I should just mention very quickly that you are the moderator, the creator, the admin. I don't know what the term would be.
One of the admins, I think.
Well, certainly one of the admins, among other titles, of the Secular Sexuality fan group, which I definitely want to encourage people to check out and to join in on this conversation. We'd love to see you there. There's been spirited debate all day today, actually, on topics of sapiosexuality and a number of other things. I found out that one of my crushes from high school has an OnlyFans account, and I posted about that. So there's lots of great conversation to be had, and I'd encourage people to check it out.
We do. We have some really great conversations. But what happened was I jumped on an asexual dating site, and forgot all about it. It's based mainly in America, so I didn't really expect to get any response. Forgot all about it. Got a contact from someone here in Australia. I thought that they were contacting me for friendship only. They just wanted to connect over some shared interest, topical interests, philosophy, etc. So I didn't even look at their profile. I just said, sure, no worries. Didn't know who they were, nothing. So we were chatting, and he was a he, and he was fantastic. We were having a brilliant conversation. We really strongly connected. And then the conversation started seeming wrong to me. He started talking about meeting up, and it seemed a bit more romantic. And I said, I think I've misunderstood this conversation. I thought you were contacting me for friendship. Were you contacting me for more social and romantic? And he said, yes, social romantic. I thought, oh, okay, I'm not really up for that, but I thought, I really like you, so I'll go and check out your profile. I'm 52 years old. He's 24. I cannot. I had a visceral response. My daughter is 30. I cannot see a 24-year-old as anything but a responsibility, not an equal.
It's so funny. We were literally talking about this right before the show. That I had a new subscriber to my OnlyFans who was 20, and I saw his Facebook profile and saw that he graduated in 2019, and I was like, oh God, this is a fetus. And then I was like, wait a minute, I graduated in 2016. That's really not that far apart, but it's far enough that makes me go, oh, this is a child. Oh no, a child.
I know. And look, I don't know whether it's because I have, I'm a mum, and I just instantly feel maternal to younger people, because obviously my daughter's age group sort of ranges around there. But it was visceral. I was like, I can't even talk to you anymore. I do, and everything's fine. We're friends. He's quite hurt and upset. But he is actually studying to be a clinical psychologist, and he wanted to analyse why I have these feelings and, why should it be a boundary? And I'm just like, no, this is a visceral thing. Don't even touch it.
Yeah, I don't know that you need to argue with your instincts there. I mean, I might encourage you to take a moment to like check in and see like, okay, what is the influence of culture? What is the influence of these different forces? Is there a good reason for me to feel this way? Because our bodies aren't necessarily the best indicators. Whenever I hear somebody say that like, well, if gay people are okay, then how come it makes me so sick to my stomach to watch them kiss? Like, it infuriates me because, the metaphor I've used on the show before, just very briefly, is that I think we can all agree that if we wanted to assign a moral value to everything, like, we're on the good place or something, we would all come together and say that it's amazing that we can perform open heart surgery, that we can take people apart and put them back together in these fascinating, beautiful ways. That's a good thing. I would absolutely throw up and or pass out if I was in an operating theater watching an open heart surgery. So, our body's initial reaction may not be the best indicator, but I also don't need you to fight against that. If you're feeling like this isn't a good relationship for you, that's okay. You don't need to swim upstream against your own inclinations in that way.
Yeah. Oh, look, I don't doubt there's a lot of social influence, but there's also just that there's a maternal instinct thing that's definitely coming forward. I can feel that without any doubt. That's very clear. But there is a few other bits and pieces that I can't quite get my head around. And I just don't know whether it's something I need to explore to be truly skeptical or rational, or whether it's just okay. And look, to be honest, I'm leaning towards it's just okay not to even know why. I don't think there's anything particularly wrong in saying I don't want this huge age gap, mostly because I can't relate to any other part of his life. He still lives with his parents who are my age. Yeah.
That can be a real barrier. And, to some people, that is part of the appeal. And, so long as you are being careful and gentle with one another and everybody is consenting. And I do sincerely believe that a 24-year-old is more than capable of providing consent. I might just very quickly lob out to you and to the audience Dan Savage's campfire rule. The basic philosophy that if you leave somebody after a relationship better than you found them, that you have permission to play, that it's okay to involve yourself in these different types of dynamics. And there's really nothing wrong here about it. But that also doesn't mean it's for you. And that's fine. And that's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, I've tried to be very careful with him and very gentle, and he really is a wonderful person, but I think he does find a lot of difficulty finding partners of his age because he is so very intelligent. Unfortunately, there's a mismatch between life experience and the intellectual intelligence.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure being ace doesn't help.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't. And he's into kink, so he's got it rough all the way around.
Yeah, that's a hard match.
Been through all of it. It is. It's a really hard match. So he thought he hit the jackpot with me because I also enjoy kink and asexuality, but well. Things. So that's been my last few weeks. It's been a bit of a ride, actually.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, sounds like an absolute adventure. Well, fortunately, there are plenty of kangaroos in the outback, or what? Forget that joke. I didn't just say that. We're good.
There's plenty of koalas in the forest.
Something.
Well, thank you so much for taking my call, and nice to have met you, Dianna.
Yes, nice to meet you.
Hey, thank you so much.
Well, hopefully we'll see lots of people in the Facebook group who can add to my dilemmas. I've posted dilemmas.
Yeah, we'll see you online. Thanks so much for
Yep.
calling.
Thanks, Tanjil.
That's
Oh,
great. Thanks, everyone.
bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Oh, it was so good to hear from her.
Yeah, and it is worth just saying again. I know we mention it at the bottom of every show, but the Secular Sexuality fan group is a really good time, and I would love to see you there. We have some very fun conversations and are able to maybe tease things out and have a little bit of back and forth that we're not really able to do on air. So I hope people will check that out. But in the meantime, I gotta ask you the big burning question here, Dianna, which is just, what does the Bible actually have to say about gender? Because I know we hear a lot of how it's interpreted.
Yeah, there's not actually a lot there, at least as far as like pertains to our current world. There are select verses, a sort of clobber verses every so often, but they're not really specifically, because trans wasn't a term or necessarily an idea that existed for the writers of that time, so it doesn't particularly say anything to our current time other than what we know of like loving and accepting other people. One of the good books on this topic, if I can plug a little bit, is my friend Austin Hartkey, who wrote a book called Transforming, that is a deep dive into what the Bible actually has to say. And it is basically that, like, where the Bible talks about it, it's much more fluid than it is anywhere in what evangelicals say it is. In terms of, like, it talks about the eunuchs are often seen as like a transgender analogy sort of thing, and they are treated very well. They have a very good place and specific spot in their society, and they are not scorned. And so that's a big thing. There's a verse in Deuteronomy that a lot of people like to trot out about men not wearing women's clothes. And so, but if you look at actual Jewish scholars, if you look at Talmudic scholars, their interpretation of that is that, well, men at the time were wearing women's clothes to go get close to other women who weren't their wife. And to basically like be pervs. And so that rule came about to basically say, hey, stop doing that, you creeps, sort of thing. So that wasn't an invocation against trans people at all. It was an invocation against using this way of clothing, way of dressing yourself in an effort to deceive and confuse others.
Cis men abusing women and trans folks getting the brunt of it. Where have I heard that story before?
What a surprise!
Yeah. What are there any modern corollaries?
I even have like a personal anecdote about those scriptures in particular as they were applied to my life as a teenager. I had this friend in high school who was bisexual and like vaguely gender non-conforming, not very specific about his labels, but we were okay, this is gonna sound like a brag. It's not a brag. We were the smartest kids in our English class, and we had this report coming up, and we made a bet about who would get the better grade. And if I lost, I would have to wear clown makeup to school. And if he lost, he would have to wear a dress to school. And he lost literally by like 1 point. I got a perfect score and he got like a 99. And it was on some like it was definitely on some grammar bullshit. It was on like a very nitpicky thing, but I won anyway. And I gave him like some of my Jehovah's Witness clothes, you know, a skirt and a blouse and some heels and some pantyhose and a slip. And he was like, not gonna lie, I'm feeling myself in this. I'm not like mad about it. Like everybody was laughing at him, but he was like,
this is working. Yeah.
I'm okay with this. And I told a Jehovah's Witness friend about it, and she gave me the third degree about like, the Bible says not to cross dress. And I was like, I helped someone sin. Oh no. But it's like it was just such a joyful occasion that like he didn't even feel bad about it. Like people were like, dude, Kyle's in a skirt. But Kyle was like, this is
Yeah.
good. I like this. This is fine. So it's like I felt slightly bad about it at the time, but then I was like, but he liked it. Like, I don't know why I would like, this is when I was still, of course, very indoctrinated. I was just like, I don't really feel bad about this. He felt good. I don't.
Yeah.
That was one of the many cognitive dissonances I had about religion and gender at the time, of course. But yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me of, there's this example that I like to use of how our culture has changed. I was a kid in the 90s and I grew up watching Boy Meets World. And there's an episode of that where the two main characters, Sean and Corey, dress as women.
Chick Like Me.
Yes.
I remember that. Wow.
Yes.
Why is that lodged in my brain so deeply? I love that show.
Sean passes as a woman. And there's a moment where Feeney sees them in the school and goes up to Sean and says, hey, if there's anything you want to talk about, my office door is open. And it's one of those things where, like, if that happened on a show today, there would be screaming and yelling about it. And so, but like culturally at that time, it was like, oh yeah, well, he might be trans, like, sort of thing. And I wish they had like borne that out in the series, but they didn't.
The joke was just like, he passes so well, he might actually be trans.
He's a total trans egg.
Yeah.
Well, I know we have kind of touched on shades of this, but can you illuminate for us at all any further how Christianity is still driving or impacting this conversation today?
Yeah, Christianity, especially evangelical Christianity, is, because I like to make the distinction because I have a lot of friends who are queer and trans pastors and stuff. So this is one particular flavor of Christianity that has a very colonialist view of how they approach sex and gender. And if they aren't doing it, then no one else should be. So they talk about how like you should have all these special mores around sex before marriage and these very strict rules that you have to follow. And if you're trans, you're in sin, and so you should go back to your original assigned gender and stuff, because they believe that their views about gender and sexuality are the basis, the bedrock of the family and society, which is complete bullshit. Because it comes out of a 1950s sort of moral panic about the civil rights movement and the feminist movement, the burgeoning feminist movement following World War II. Stephanie Coontz wrote a great book in I want to say 1991, called The Way We Never Were, that dissects that myth of the heterosexual married couple with 2.5 kids as like the American dream. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of that in evangelical Christianity. So it's really worth unpacking all of that.
And I'll just mention to anybody who is listening to the podcast while they jog through the park or anybody who just didn't have a pen handy, that we'll have links to all of these different books and a lot of the things we're talking about in the show notes for this episode.
Sounds like my next audiobook has been picked for me.
Right? Well, and it bears the question then, all of us, have come out of Christianity. I know a lot of folks watching never experienced Christianity in a firsthand kind of way. And yet these ideas are just pervasive throughout our culture. So I'm curious if you have noticed as you've been researching, as you've been having these conversations, and honestly to both of you, just as Enby folks that exist in this air that we're all breathing, what kinds of particular hangups or misconceptions are flowing from these sort of these like fake nostalgia ideals?
Yeah, there's a particular moral panic that is happening right now. And moral panic is really the only way you can describe it, because it is people panicking over some sort of moral slight or perceived immorality that they think, but is not actually happening. It's not actually anything. And that's over trans boys as teenagers, saying that there are all these, they call them young girls, who are becoming men. And at the core of it is a fertility worry. They're worried that these young girls are giving up their ability to have children. So it all comes back to controlling the bodies of people with uteruses. And it comes back to a lot of that.
And the sad thing is that a lot of those people are women who claim to advocate for women's rights to their own bodies.
Yeah.
Which is which is especially like, well, if you advocate for people's rights to their own bodies, why can't they change them if they want to? What is the logic here?
Because we're losing lesbians.
Oh,
which is a weird argument.
Yeah, that's I remember I saw a movie. I think it was called Three Generations. It was on Netflix or something like that. And it was there was these three people living together. There was a trans boy whose mom was a cis straight woman, and then his grandma was a cis lesbian. And the grandma is like progressive in some ways, but totally behind in others. She's just like, why don't you just be a lesbian? Why don't you just be a lesbian? And I remember seeing that and be like, at first I was like, that's gotta be unrealistic. There's no way. And then I got on the internet and I was like, oh, okay. So that's real. Yikes.
Yeah. That's actually, if I can delve back a little bit into the history, an interesting retread of the 1800s sort of theory around homosexuality, because homosexuality wasn't necessarily a category. So they believed that men who slept with men and women who slept with women were inverting their sexual role, because the role of the role of women in society was to be heterosexual, married to men and to reproduce, and men were to be married to women. And so for men to sleep with other men, then one of them was taking on the female role, and stuff. And that's sort of the origin of the who wears the pants sort of analogy. And then like researchers eventually discovered that no, homosexuality is its own thing, but the idea of like each person in a same-sex relationship is somehow taking on the other gender in some way. They are mirroring heterosexuality, has stuck around for a really long time. And so I think a lot of people are still stuck in that idea that like being a lesbian means that you're acting mannish, and therefore for them, for you to actually go on and become a man, then it doesn't compute to them, because it's like, well, why couldn't you just stay lesbian? No. Yeah,
that's definitely. Ooh, I've heard that kind of thing. So we're already talking about some of these hangups, but what other sort of like hangups, misconceptions do you think sort of come along with this? Well, I want to say Christian idea, but as we've discussed, it's a much more recent, specifically evangelical idea of gender. What sort of other hangups and misconceptions have come along with that?
A lot of it seems to be just not understanding that people are people, and that we all have our own sense of gender, and we all have our own sense of identity. It's just that cis people haven't really interrogated it. So that's one of the first things that I like to tell cis people who ask me, like, how can I be an ally, is interrogate your own gender, like see how you feel, develop an argument for why you are the way you are, and stuff, and explore that. Because then you'll have some bit of sense of how we feel as non-binary and trans people who are constantly thinking about our gender in a lot of ways and how we are perceived and all that. So I think just more self-introspection on that, and what comes from culture, what comes from ourselves, what's nature versus nurture sort of stuff, is really important thinking to have to do.
Absolutely. I feel like I did a lot of that myself in figuring out my own gender identity. Like when I was a teenager, one of my best friends was a binary trans man. And I was like, well, none of my experiences with gender are anything like the extreme dysphoria that you've experienced. So maybe I'm not, maybe these questions that I've had about my gender just need to be like, put on the back burner. But like when I gave myself the space to really ask myself questions and say, like, how do I like being perceived? How do I perceive myself? What, like, not necessarily thinking about gender dysphoria, but gender euphoria. Like, what brings me joy in my own gender perception? That was kind of where I finally sort of found myself in being non-binary. Is like, I enjoy the idea of androgyny. I enjoy being very feminine one minute, very masculine the next, and somewhere in between all the time. This is where I find myself.
Yeah, it's sort of the Marie Kondo, it sparks joy.
It sparks joy. Yeah.
But like for me, the first time somebody used they them for my pronouns, like I almost cried. I was so happy because it sounded so right to me, and it was this sigh of relief. And that was when I knew I had made the right decision in coming out, because I had struggled with that for a while, because I was like, well, if I'm non-binary, then like what does that actually change about me? And what does that look like uncloseted versus closeted? And I, for a long time, stayed closeted because I didn't want to have to explain it to people, was part of it. So it's really nice that we've come into this moment where it's becoming much more understood, which is really great.
Yeah.
No. Well, I loved the part of the conversation that my computer would allow me to listen to. Really beautiful just hearing from both of you your own stories. And I like to think that we are ourselves now entering into the historical record, something that a bunch of Nazi dickbags won't be able to delete, and just making sure that the world remembers that Enby folks exist.
Yeah.
So on that note, Rudy, are you ready to jump back into the calls?
I will, but I just want to note that as you say that, I experience gender euphoria just from the idea of defying Nazis. Like, yes, that's good. That's good stuff.
Good stuff. Yeah, bottle that.
Oh, great. Let's talk to Pauly in Germany, who uses they, them pronouns. And they want to ask, do you have any thoughts about Enby culture and how do we create it? Pauly, you are on with Dianna, Rudy, and Christy. How are you doing?
Hi, you three. I'm doing great. Yeah. Well, you basically, how do I begin? Basically, I've always felt a disconnect to the binary genders, and I think I'm missing something, and my thoughts are: is there something like non-binary culture? Is it LGBTQT culture? And is there something like that? Dianna, do you have any thoughts on that? And maybe is there a way to make it?
The quaff. Mention the quaff.
Yeah.
Yes, we're actually talking about before the show about how there's a non-binary haircut where it's shaved down on the sides and then you have the coif on top. And stuff. And I think a lot of non-binary culture is being developed. We are deciding what it means to be non-binary and what it means to celebrate that. And if that means naming ourselves Sock, then we're going to do it, sort of thing. But it's one of those things where we are in a moment where we're able to create it for ourselves, and decide what we want to be part of our culture and what we don't. Which is, I think, an outstanding place to be. We're at the just beginning of it, and so we get to decide.
I love that fluidity. Right, like 10 minutes before we went on, I went and reached into my closet and I put on my blazer, and at the same time, Rudy disappeared for a moment to change into shorts. And I made a comment to Dianna about how, that's Enby culture right there. And I can't justify that at all, but I think that they laughed, and I think that Rudy gets it. Like, I don't know why that strikes me as NB culture, but it kind of is. And I find that just absolutely fascinating. I can't quantify it, but it is beautiful to watch it be constructed. I think, though, Pauly, the best answer to your question is being like NB culture is just the culture of NB people. And so being around other non-binary folks or existing in queer spaces is going to be the best way to participate in, to grow, and to watch that culture develop.
As somebody who is just deep into the internet, I can tell you a few things that I've observed from other NB people and from my own NB friends, who I have many of. Collared shirts, that's NB culture. Collared shirts, button-down shirts, having a weird ass name that you picked yourself, that's NB culture. Like, the name Jay is automatically NB culture. I don't know why. I don't know how that happened, but every like that was. I told a story earlier about how me and my fiance, both working at a restaurant separately without talking to each other, met a person who just started working at that restaurant, and we both were like, what are your pronouns? Because you're obviously not cis. And that person's name was Jay. Like, we both were just like, you are not cis. No way. Identifying with small, gross creatures for some reason is a little bit NB culture. Like, I know so many NB people who are like, yeah, I'm a goblin. I'm like, yes, you are. Yep. Yes, you are. And I'm and I am definitely some kind of fairy. But like, I'm not just cute. I'm also the trickster kind, you know, like, let's be clear. I'm not a fully good mythical creature. Like, there's already things that, like, if you look for it, are NB culture, but you know, we're in the middle of making it, which is so fun. Like, me and all my NB friends are in the middle of making NB culture. Weird bad names are definitely NB culture. And I love that about us. Like one of my very best fucking friends was like, I'm changing my name to Shade. And I was like, yes. Like, what? That's insane. But yes.
I can't help but feel like the ACA needs to create a show that is just you, Rudy, and V sitting around pointing at things that are NB culture. But that's NB, that's not NB. That's NB, oh, that's cis.
Look at this tree frog. NB as fuck. Look at this little tree frog.
Tree frogs are NB. I have no idea why, but I get it. I get it.
It's just the vibe. It's just
I'm one of those little poison dart frogs.
Yeah, So I don't know if that cleared anything up at all, Pauly, but I hope that at the very least you feel welcomed and invited into this this very like burgeoning world.
Oh yeah, Rudy, you I think you really helped me with something at first, like broadening my view about what is NB culture, and also about the names. I've always shied away from searching for more or feeling into more like different names. I mean, yeah, that's really interesting. Maybe I will do that. Yeah.
Yeah, if a weird ass name is what feels like you, then who gives a shit if it's weird? It's you.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that's something that I sort of embraced when I was picking a new name for myself. Rudy is not the name that is on my birth certificate. It is not the name that is on my driver's license. And it's not the name that's on my vaccination card. Everybody should get vaccinated. But it's but it is the name that I sort of picked out of a list of names that I like, and some of them were really weird, like Rowan and Ripley and Rebel.
I just want to point out that I know a Rowan who is Enby. Just wanted to throw that out there.
It's an Enby name. It is. And it's like you could literally name your like if you can legally change your name to Crow, who cares? If that's what feels like you, do it. Like
just
you can
be prepared to spell it over the phone a lot.
Yeah, like Crow, like CROW, Crow.
My name is a very, very common name, but when you associate it with this voice and you work over the phone, you end up spelling it about 20 times a day. It's a good time.
Yeah, people call me Ruby by accident all the time. All the time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I just want to point out, I have a friend who's named Flan. So, and they chose that name based out of an internet joke. Where on Twitter for a little while they were a little custard emoji, and then it just sort of evolved from there. I do know, Pauly, in Germany there are some rules that you guys have about like absurdist names and what names you can have, but I would imagine like even if you can't legally change it to that, consider like if that feels right to you, go by something else. Go, just try it out. Say it to yourself in the mirror. Whatever works, and stuff, because names are extremely personal and they are what you decide.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah. I landed on Rudy because it was my grandfather's nickname. That was like his name was his birth name wasn't Rudy either, but that's what people called him. And I missed him a lot, and he was one of the reasons that I stayed in the cult religion that I was in for so long. Was like, oh, if my resurrected grandfather. But then when I stopped believing in all that, I still wanted a connection to him, and I was like, I really don't want to change my like my initials, but I want to change my name, so I'm going to stick with an R name. And that one just came up, and I was like, this feels the closest to me. And even if the like it literally doesn't matter if the reason that you choose a different name is because it was your grandfather's nickname or because it was an emoji that you used a lot. Like it literally does not matter. It doesn't matter. It's your name. It's nobody else's name. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks of it. It's yours.
I think there's a lot of value in shaking up that convention and just sort of reclaiming our identities in this way. We as queer folks are so often pushed to the margins and so often told that our identities are invalid, that our culture isn't important. And I think that there's something a little bit beautiful about saying, you know what, who cares what if my great-great-grandfather was named this and my grandfather, and I don't have to carry that legacy. I get to be me. I get to do my own thing, and just embracing that this is your identity and nobody else's. If it feels good when you hear it coming out of the mouth of somebody that you care about, if it feels nice seeing it written on a cup of coffee or shouted over a intercom that your order is ready, then you're onto something.
Okay. Yeah. A lot of input. Yeah.
It's a lot to mull over. I know we're kind of all over the place, but it's a messy, nebulous kind of topic. There are no right answers here. And so let me just encourage you to trust your gut. And I hope that we've at least like introduced you to a plethora of bizarre options so you can start to see what feels right to you.
Yeah. Thanks very much.
Hey, we appreciate you calling in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for calling.
Yeah. Danke.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Yeah, I always feel bad because I feel like we have left folks like without an answer, but there is no the answer when we're talking about culture. Yeah. It's squishy, it's messy. I mean, this came up again on the Facebook fan group today in a deep conversation. When we're talking about the human sciences, things are messy. when we're talking about history, when we're talking about culture, when we're talking about gender, like, yes, we can get our microscopes out and we can start to understand DNA. It's much more complicated than XX and XY.
Yes.
We can, start to understand hormone levels and these different things. But all of this, human beings are not equations. We're just much messier than that. And that's a beautiful thing to me. But it's also something that we have to get comfortable with in our very skeptical, scientifically minded world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think a lot of particularly people who are anti-trans like to claim science is on their side, but it's not actually, if you look at the science. Like the XXXY thing, like, I don't actually know what my chromosomes are because I've never had a test done. And when you see somebody on the street, you're not looking at chromosomes. You're looking at a person who has chosen to present themselves in a specific way. And stuff. And so it doesn't really matter at that point what the science says, even if science was like, this is binary, this is whatever sort of thing, because people are people. And they're allowed to present themselves in whatever way they want. They have agency and autonomy.
Yeah. And it's worth pointing out that these are burgeoning sciences, and anytime we have an incomplete science, there are going to be folks that come in and try to suggest that they do understand it all. And the form that answer tends to take is through, some appeal to religiosity, some appeal to the divine. That's how we fill in the gaps in our knowledge. And you can do that, but just know that you're filling it in with sawdust and bullshit. It's not actually a real solution. You can instead just embrace the fact that none of us know what the hell is going on. And even as we're looking and learning to develop more and more, it's messy. And that's okay. We can embrace that.
Yeah. I will say I take comfort as a trans person in seeing cis people go, her penis and vagina, and that just makes me go like, yeah, you have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, right.
You have no idea what you're talking about. That just makes that like, all right, go on with your little self.
Just go about your day.
Yep.
Well, Rudy, do you think we have time to sneak in one more call?
Yes, absolutely, we do. We have Piper from Georgia. And she wants to know how to separate pain from religious indoctrination with one's gender identity. Piper, you're on with Dianna, Rudy, and Christy. How are you doing?
Hi, good. I can't believe I'm on now. I just kind of did this impromptu.
Hey, well, we're excited to hear from you.
Yeah, that's the best kind of call, is the one that you just decided to do, out of the blue. So tell us a little bit more about your question.
Yeah, so for context, I'm 19. I'm a former Christian, specifically Church of Christ. I deconverted/left about the time quarantine started. And now, especially now that I'm away at college and around more non-binary people, I've been questioning my own gender identity more and just realizing like how much of my ideas about gender and what it and ideas around that were baked into me just out of my religious upbringing. And I've realized that I'm becoming increasingly more uncomfortable with certain female pronouns and language at times, but I don't know if that's because those make me uncomfortable or because I just associate them with certain ideas surrounding religion. And I'm also looking back at certain things that I did when I was deeply devout and wondering if those were for different reasons as well. Like when my body started to develop, I started wearing more baggy clothing because, I didn't want to be a temptress or a stumbling block. And even though I'm deconverted, I'm still wearing more baggy clothes. So I'm wondering if that's more because, I just don't like the way that my body presents that way.
Oh, as a curvy teenage AFAB person, man, oh man, can I relate to all of that, Piper. Wow, yeah. I mean, I kind of had the opposite approach of like, I don't like I didn't wear baggy clothes on purpose because I was kind of okay with being perceived as a hoe. Like, I was a little bit okay with that because I was like, whatever, I'm the pretty one in my family, it's fine. But I'm like still spiritual AF. I just also have a booty, so you know, it is what it is. But no, I definitely get a lot of what you're saying, and I guess from my own experience, I can say that if you're starting to feel like you don't relate to femininity, it's probably not as much your religious upbringing as you might think. Because if you're hanging out with more Enby people and that's the reason you're starting to think maybe this isn't what I thought it was, then it's probably not your religious ideas of gender that are influencing that. I mean, almost certainly. If you're thinking that because of hanging out with people who do not have your specific idea of gender, then, I should say the specific idea of gender that you were brought up with, then that's probably not the major influence here. I mean, you don't hate women, do you? You're not ashamed of womanhood. You're not ashamed of... You don't think that, like, a person who does meet all the trad wife stereotypes isn't necessarily a bad person in your mind, right?
Right.
So that's probably not... It's I highly doubt that it's just you being ashamed of femininity. I would highly doubt it. I again, this is just from my own perspective, because there was a part of me that thought that too, for a little bit, and my mother-in-law still is kind of just like, hey, are you just like confused about womanhood and gender? And I'm like, nope, because the parts of me that are feminine love to be feminine. The parts of me that are, it's good. It's good. I love it. It's great. Those parts, that's awesome. And the parts of me that are not feminine are cool with not that. So no.
Yeah, there's this accusation that AFAB non-binary people get accused of, is that we are trying to escape the oppression of womanhood, and that sort of thing. And I actually spoke to my friend Jude Doyle, who is a non-binary writer, uses he, they pronouns, and was like, hey, are we, like, what do you think about this question? Like, how are we escaping womanhood? And they replied that, like, what we are going to is often a lot harder than being a woman, at least in this society. There's a lot of fun with it, but it's also like you have to explain yourself to people and blah, blah, blah. So, like, if we were just doing this to escape, we're pretty bad at that. We're not doing a great job of actually escaping any sort of gender depression by going into another marginalized gender. So that's the thing where we're just resolving our own questions about what we think a woman is and whether or not we fit into that category.
Yeah, God, I would never, like, choose to be trans and Enby if I wasn't trans and Enby. I mean, I like being trans and Enby, but man, is it annoying sometimes. Go to work every single day. I have my they, them pronouns on my fucking name tag, and not a goddamn person uses them. And I'm just like, okay, fuck me, I guess. Every moment of every day. Like, I certainly would not choose that if I had a conscious decision over it.
Yeah, for me, it was much more just realizing that the category of woman didn't fit for me anymore. I didn't like being perceived as a woman. Like you said, Piper, when people call me she, her, it kind of makes me cringe, sort of thing. So it's one of those things where it just sort of made sense to move.
And I'll just say gently that if there is some piece of you that is kind of rebelling or reacting to all of the oppressive aspects of femininity, or all of the oppression on femininity in our culture, that's okay. You know, you don't have to have all of this figured out, especially if you have been in your journey away from religion for just about a year now. You'll never be able to know, like, well, what is me and what is my trauma? I mean, your experiences are part of what make you up. And while, yes, you will be able to heal from a lot of those hurts, and, you know, the ACA offers a lot of information about how to do that. We love to point people towards recovering from religion, and there are all of these different ways to do that healing. Ultimately, it doesn't matter where it came from. You don't need to own anything. You don't owe it to anybody to label yourself or describe yourself in any particular way. And whatever labels or adjectives feel like they fit you or suit you, that's great. But also, you have permission to change them. You know, if you do decide that you identify as non-binary, fantastic, great for you. If a month later you realize, oh, actually, maybe that was a false start, or if 10 years down the road you find that you actually identify as a she, her, or as a he, him, that's all valid as well. This is all messy, squishy kind of information. We're all just figuring this out. And the real goal here is not to find your true gender or your true identity. The goal here is to live a happy and healthy and beautiful life. And it sounds like you're taking a lot of steps towards doing that. And let me just encourage you to lean into what feels good. That's the key here.
Yeah, piggybacking off of Christy, I recently changed my like major label of gender fluid to gender queer. Like I was like, you know what? Gender fluid totally worked for me at a point in time. I think genderqueer is a better fit for me now. That's fine. I have a friend on Facebook who will literally update their statuses with like, okay, my name is this right now. These are the pronouns that I want. And just occasionally changes it. And it's like, that's fine. That's fine. You don't have to stick with anything. You are not tied down to anything. There's always going to be a couple of assholes who are like, wow, make up your mind. But, you know, you don't have to listen to them. It's you. It's like it's you and it's your thing and it's whatever the hell you're comfortable with. Whatever makes you happy. Whatever gives you that gender euphoria. Because it's your gender. It's your identity. It's your pronouns. It's not anybody else's. So.
Thank you. I really appreciate all that. And I think one thing that has been keeping me from experimenting with different labels or pronouns has been being scared of possibly perpetuating like misinformation about certain labels that I'm still learning about. And I think there's a lot of fear of like doing the quote unquote wrong thing that's still kind of baked into me as well.
I definitely had that when I came out as Enby because I said this earlier. When I was a teenager, I had a friend who was a binary trans guy and he had very bad dysphoria. So my own questions about gender, I was just like, put that on the back burner because it's not nearly as big as his struggle. So how can I possibly put myself under the trans umbrella when there are trans people who are having this struggle? It's not anything like his experience, so it must not be like valid at all. And I had to talk myself out of that mentality. And it's not.
There's no gatekeeping in queer culture.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a no true Scotsman, but there doesn't need to be, right?
Like if it's like there's going to be some people who will try to gatekeep you, but don't be the person that does that to you. Don't gatekeep yourself.
Yeah, and I also want to say it's okay to sit with it for a while, to let it percolate and think about it for a while, because you're young. We were talking at the beginning of the show about how like I view anybody under 25 as like a baby, because I'm mid-30s and stuff. And I'm 35. I came out last year as non-binary, so this is like a thing that can be a lifelong journey and stuff. And it's really like, I can't imagine doing the wrong thing when you're expressing yourself with your gender. Like, there's no right or wrong in that way because it's expressing who you are.
Yeah, doing the wrong thing is just doing what feels bad for you. If it feels bad, that's the wrong thing.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I really appreciate all your input.
Hey, we appreciate you calling in and wish you the very best of luck on this new, wild, crazy gender journey that you're on.
Yeah, if you do happen
thank
to
you.
make some discoveries in this area or change some things, please call us back. I would love to hear the update from you, Piper.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be awesome. I'll see if I can work up the courage again.
All right. All right, take care.
Well,
You too.
we're just about ready to wrap up for the night, and the truth is we've already talked about so many different aspects of the modern gender movement and all of the changes and the development of NB culture. So Dianna, before we let you go and before I let Rudy kind of take us out for the evening, I guess I just want to ask, how can people watching tonight be better allies here? How can all of the cis folks who are pretty confident in their identity just be better allies to the NB folks that are still creating this new culture?
Yeah, there are lots of different ways. One is to respect our labels, respect what we have to say about ourselves. If your friend changes their name to Bunny, use that name. It's even if it sounds weird to you as a cis person or whatever, learning basic respect. One of the ways that you can do that is to practice. If your friend changes her pronoun, practice saying Dianna uses they them pronouns. They went to the store to get themselves this or something like that. Practice that in the mirror at home, and that way it'll be natural for you. And another larger way would be to help us with taking up advocacy, especially in the political realm. There have been a siege of anti-trans bills across the US. And we trans people, we're a small community. We're loud, but we're small. And we don't always have the energy to continually fight for ourselves, even though we have to. So one of the ways cis allies can really be accomplices in that is to take up that fight with us and to help out with, like, even if it's just volunteering somewhere, passing out pamphlets, calling your legislators, whatever, doing that sort of work, putting yourself out there as somebody who supports trans people is important. And it's a good way to help us with the burden of fighting for our own lives.
Yeah.
If I could add anything, slightly piggybacking off of what you said, Dianna, we're like kind of fighting for our right to exist unfettered every single day. If you're gonna, don't ask trans people for terminology. If you could probably Google it, just Google it. Like, if you're asking for their personal opinion or thoughts on something, that's one thing. But if you're asking for a definition of a term, please use Google.
Yeah.
I'm not the ambassador of all things trans.
Yeah. Or if you, like, I had a cis friend text me yesterday to ask me some specific questions about trans kids and stuff, because she was doing some of that ally work and dealing with somebody, and she sent me some money afterwards because she was like, I recognize that you did labor for me, so here, I'm buying you dinner. So
that's you could also ask me questions and send me money. I didn't even think about that.
I was just about to say,
that's cool too.
Maybe
if I'm going to be your trans
DMing
ambassador, pay me to be your trans ambassador.
Yes.
Yeah, if you have any gender questions for Rudy, instead of DMing them on Twitter, DM them on OnlyFans, right? Is that work for you?
$5 subscription to ask me about trans issues.
Hey, if you can reach just one person.
Oh God, that's amazing. This was fabulous. Thank you so much, Dianna. This was a great conversation. Let's put Dianna's links up on the screen so people can find them and look at that beautiful Enby coif. Please buy their book. I'm certainly gonna look it up. Is there an audiobook version of it, by the way? I should ask.
No, not yet. and stuff. They're not for the other two. I'm hoping we can get one for this next book, but we'll see what my publisher is able to do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because I'm an audiobook person, but yeah. Anyways, besides of course following Dianna on all of their fabulous social media and buying their book, etc., etc., you can find more of this show and talk to us and talk to Tanjil on the Facebook Secular Sexuality fan group, which is at facebook.com/group/secular-sex-f. FG, of course, standing for fan group. It's technically not official, but we're all on there.
It's a good time.
Yeah, it's a good time. You should join us all there. And if you want to join us on Discord, because a lot of us are on Discord all the time, it's tiny.cc/ACA Discord. Please join us there. I believe we're going to be there after the show briefly to do a little Discord after show, so definitely join us there. And of course, if you want to buy any fabulous sex merch, you go to bit.ly/AEN merch and get a t-shirt, get a coffee mug, get a pillow. And those of us who are ex-Jehovah's Witnesses know the significance of a sexy pillow, if you know what I mean. And before we go out, we've got to talk about those fabulous people that make this show happen. The crew. Where are the crew? Show us the crew.
Yes,
give us the crew.
Thank you so
Look at
much,
the beautiful
everybody.
crew. Wait, Martin's getting his cat. We got the kitty cat. All right. Well, and of course, if you want to see more pussies than that, you can go to my OnlyFans. I always have to make that joke. I can't. I'm sorry. I could not. It was right there, and I couldn't not go there. It was right there. It's been marvelous.
Yeah, I suppose whether you are, binary or somewhere in between, whether
or out of the spectrum altogether.
And whether you are a subscriber to Rudy's OnlyFans or not, this is as good a moment as any to take a quiet moment for yourself and give yourself a big ol' orgasm. Or better yet,
give
somebody else one.